Hello. I'm so excited to be back to be talking about design trends. This time we're going to cover website design trends. You might have seen my previous video about this. We went over 18 trends that we were noticing in graphic design over the last 5 or 10 years, or that I was noticing, but this was also research done within the industry and seeing what other people are talking about. And that's exactly what I'm going to do today, but it's going to cover website design trends and trends that we're noticing, especially in the last 5 or 2 years, really. So I put together a similar presentation that I'll walk you through today. This time we're going to go over 15 website design trends. These are the top design trends that are happening right now, but if there's any that you think are a trend that are worth noting that I didn't cover today, please let me know in the comments, because I would love to hear what else you're noticing, especially popping up within the last year. So let's dive in. So before we cover the design trends from today, I think it's really important that we go over the history of design trends, especially in website design, because oh boy, there's quite a history there. So one book that I referenced in the last video was all about this history of graphic design, the 40th edition by Toshin Books. I think that this is a really great resource in just design history in general. But let's go way back to the year 2000 and explore website design. So the web world was very new, very young. There weren't a whole lot of designers touching things. This was all made by people who were familiar with HTML and CSS, and that was it. They were not really designers. This is the .com era. The trends that were happening around this time were very literal, technical kinds of trends where links needed to be a different color than the text. So they're all blue and they're all underlined, and we still see some of that today. Everything was organized as if it was reading a spreadsheet. It was very information heavy, and sites needed to load quickly. So there couldn't be a whole lot of images like there are today. And good old MySpace. I don't know about anyone else, but I had so much fun dressing up my MySpace, making my cursor do something really cool and sparkly, having a really cool animated sparkly background and tiling that on the background. So nerdy. But that is covering the 2000s. And then now in 2010, we saw a shift in this skeuomorphism kind of a world or trend that was happening, where they really wanted to make it feel like it was a physical thing but digital. So there's lots of drop shadows. There were all sorts of textures happening, a texture on texture, to make it feel like it was actually a bulletin board with cork and wood and cut paper or ripped paper. And so that was a lot of what was happening. And I think Apple was most likely the ones leading that trend. And so we saw that with the iPhone coming out and everything that they were doing and everything that apps were doing as a result. And that also reflected in website design in the 2010s as well. And then halfway through the 2010s, we saw website design shifting even more, where it kind of seemed like there's a little more design practice coming in here. It's starting to feel a little more like something you would see in an editorial magazine. And there were bigger images, bigger graphics, full screen elements. I think people were starting to realize we could break out of the margins too. So responsive design started happening around this time too. So we're kind of seeing that in design trends too. And then I covered this in the last video as well, but how trend cycles work is a really important pre-conversation before we get into the trends, because these trends aren't all black and white. They aren't all doing the same thing at the same time and aren't only for 2023. These trends are all being seen within cycles. And we've seen those cycles happening even in fashion. And there's these two different kinds of trends that we see in those cycles. There's micro trends and there's macro trends. So the micro trends are these 3 to 5 year trends that are happening, that something comes in really hot, is really hot for a few years, and then dies off quickly. And then a macro trend is something that we're seeing in more of a decade span. So that's why we have these trends that we associate with decades of fashion from the 70s and 80s and 90s, and even graphic design from those eras too. And so that's more of this macro trend that we're seeing. And so to dive into what that looks like from a visual standpoint, we have a new trend that is about 0 to 1 years. Then we have the micro trend, 1 to 2 years coming in, or will last 3 to 5 years as seen on the last slide. And then we have macro trends where it's going to span that whole decade. And then when it's out for another 10 to 12 years before it comes back again. And that's the 20-year life cycle of a trend. And so who knows what we'll see coming back in website stuff. I think some of it's already coming back. A lot of people love to go back to the 2000s era. And so we're already noticing that 20-year life cycle coming back, but maybe in a cheeky, quirky way, and wanting to really lean into nostalgia. So that brings us to 15 of the biggest trends in website design right now. So first things first, the oversized logo. This was one of the topics that we talked about in graphic design in general. Is happening on packaging, and it's also happening on websites. And a lot of websites these days are doing big footer logos, or even big header logos too. And then once you scroll down, it animates slowly, it animates to the top in the nav bar and a much smaller scale. And so there's this need or this trend of wanting to have your logo being larger than life, being loud and proud, and something that is the first thing people see the moment they get to your site. And then they scroll down and they, that mental image is stuck in their mind, hopefully, as they're scrolling down of, okay, I just arrived at this Marco site and let me learn more about it, kind of a thing. Next trend to cover is what I'm calling geometric simplicity. This is a trend that is showing up all over website design in different ways too. So we see things like color blocking with shapes, but then we're also seeing shapes used as masks for images, and we're even seeing these animate too. So maybe a square is animating into a shape on hover, maybe it is animating in the background, or maybe pieces are falling down to the bottom as if the website is a physical container that is containing these different pieces or shapes. And so it's becoming a very playful part of website design. I'm all here for it. I'm loving seeing this happen, and I think it brings a lot of personality to a website. So that can definitely be a trend that you'd use to your advantage, knowing the strategy of the site, the personality of the site that needs to come through, and using this as a tool to reflect that. In the upper right corner, you'll notice I have a macro trend stamp or sticker or label. Each of these trends will have their own little label that I'm kind of giving them or identifying based on trends that I'm noticing. So I'm basically calling this one a macro trend because it doesn't feel like it's anything that's going to go anytime soon and has been around for a while already. Trend number 3, retro stickers. So this is similar to the previous one, but now we're creating these stickers that are stamped on things that have a little bite-sized information in there, or a little saying or quirky illustration. And these are stickers that are supposed to feel like a time of the past, something that you'd see on fruit or for a sale. And so it's really rooted in this idea of wanting to be playful and wanting to be retro and vintage. And some of these are even animating in a lot of these spaces too. Trend number 4, maximalism. I'm calling this one a new trend because you're probably noticing this coming up in the last year, where it's a lot of layers happening in website design right now, a lot of different typography. Some sites are using 5 or 6 different fonts, and a lot of layered pieces that you can interact with and play around with. And it is rooted in this very anti-minimalism place too, where people are pushing away from seeing so much minimalism in website design lately and wanting to really amp up the levels and push it and become something that's really loud and exciting. Trend number 5, the pill button. So this one is definitely a macro trend. You've probably see this already happening on almost 90% of sites that you're going to. If it's not the pill, it might be a rounded square, but gone are the days of a square button. Nobody's really using square buttons anymore. And if they are, I think it immediately dates their website. So that's the unfortunate thing about trends is they can quickly date your websites and you have to keep up with them and really notice what's happening and refresh your site frequently because you obviously want to look like a modern site and want to be speaking to your audience in a way that says, we're still here, we're aware of these things, and we're constantly freshening up our website and brand and staying up with the times. So this pill button is showing up in several ways. It shows up in categories and links and menus. So you can click on a category and it can be something that you're really interacting with, and or it's also showing up in add to cart buttons. So your main call to action becomes this element, or it's showing up in even just text moments that aren't clickable, or as seen here, it's even becoming a mask in some moments too. Trend number 6, rounded corners. So similar to what we're seeing with the pill buttons, rounded corners are also showing up everywhere in buttons as well, but even in photos and interactive elements. It's starting to feel like, again, nobody's really using squared off corners or edges or images anymore because everyone wants this to feel friendly and approachable and soft on the edges and not so gridded and squared out. And I think that's what is really making this trend what it is. And so we see it in images, in product images, in product list pages, and layered elements too. And some of these even become animated, or sometimes an image will animate 2 rounded corners from squared corners because it brings a little more visual interest in a subtle way. Trend number 7, split screen layouts. This one is definitely something that keeps coming back again and again. It's definitely a macro trend. This has been happening for quite a while now and continues this way in new forms. And some of those new forms too are having 2 images next to each other, or one big image and one small image, or an image with text next to it. But it was definitely one of the first iterations of a product page and hasn't really gone anywhere since then either, where there's an image on the left and all the product information on the right. Sometimes people flip it to throw things off and change things up a little, but for the most part, I think a lot of clients and brands want to stick with this trend because they're afraid of confusing their users and creating a product page that they have to learn how to use, because obviously when you're trying to teach a user how to learn how to use your site and your site's the only one doing it, they'll easily become frustrated. And so I always love seeing when people break out of this norm for a product page, but it's definitely the product page layout and seems to always be this way. I'm curious to know, do you agree? Is this something you've noticed that always shows up in product pages, or are you noticing a lot of people breaking away from this recently? Trend number 8, full screen text. So this is one that's definitely a macro trend and has been around for a while, and I think it's coming up more and more with bigger brands too. They're not afraid to do this now, and that's kind of exciting because it felt like for a while only designers were doing this, or only individuals were doing this, because it was a way to say, this is my homepage, which is also an about page. Let me tell you a little bit about myself and what I'm doing, and here's all the links built into this block of text so that you can follow my links to all of these other places. But now we're really seeing it showing up in menus. We're also seeing it being animated in different ways, and we're also seeing images being breaking up that block of text as well as illustrations. And so I think it's a really great way to make a statement and use a tagline or mission statement or brand ethos in a really big way. And sometimes the bigger the better. It's kind of fun and kind of a fun way to break up the content when you're hit with this large block of text before going into the rest of the text or the rest of the site. Trend number 9, grid lines. So this is a trend that is also what I would consider a macro trend. Grid lines have obviously been around since the 2000s, and so maybe it's even longer than a macro trend, or maybe just a design technique, but it's obvious in these examples that people are really leaning into grid lines in a way that they're using them unnecessarily. They're using them as a design element for fun and not really a functional design element. And so it's kind of a fun way to break up content and to keep those lines going, or having them meet each other, or to contain different elements of the site in different ways, just to separate them and to give them each their own container. I think that this trend could work really well with brands that feel like it needs to be really organized and really separated as well. And then you can even see it used in menus too, and it's almost spreadsheet-like, again, like what we were talking about in the 2000s, where it's very information heavy and wanting to find a way to organize a lot of information in a very digestible way. Trend number 10, neon green or yellow. So this was also talked about in graphic design trends, but it's something that is obviously showing up in websites all over the place. A very neon green button that we can see here on this Spruce site, or even the logo is the only thing that's in a neon green, or on this Pepper site, the announcement bar at the top is in a neon green color. So people are using this to their advantage to add a little bit of zazz, I guess you could say, pizzazz, or something to really bring a little bit of color and a little bit of edge to the brand too. So even conservative brands, I feel like, are pushing this out a little more. Trend 11, scrapbook or broken grid. So I would say that this is very much rooted in the idea of trying to be as analog as possible and push away from digital and kind of create that experience of mood boarding in real life, cut paper on a bulletin board kind of a thing, or magazine scraps kind of a thing. And so it's showing up in a lot of different ways, like this Gucci example, that ends up being a very animated site in a really cool way, or the Madre Mezcal, it's very broken up and spaced apart, or some are very layered on top of each other and you have to interact to see the other elements as if this was an in real life experience. Or some are even tilted and kind of seem to have a weight to them, or are animated in a way that makes it feel like there's a gravity pull happening with some of these different pages or images. Trend number 12, floating objects. This is definitely a new trend. I don't know about you, but I've been seeing this pop up in just the last year, maybe two, where a lot of products that are getting these beautiful renderings of their products are wanting them to be rotated and animated and to rotate as you scroll through the page and interact with the elements, and they're kind of floating too. And so it's definitely bringing a very digital experience to the brand and has a really fun way of bringing images out of a box too. So I think that's a lot of what these brands are trying to achieve, is something that feels like this very immersive experience where there's a big wash of color or design elements around it, and these elements are floating and aren't really part of an image and isn't a bunch of gridded images like other brands would do. Trend number 13, scrolling effects. This is definitely a macro trend and showing up in a lot of really fun ways, where we have this line that's being drawn, or there's this horizontal scroll happening where there's even pages being lifted as you scroll through them. There's also color changes happening as you scroll through, or you even see like a card lift up or move out of place, or even subtle animations happening within images or text as you scroll. A lot of these other elements that are moving and animating as you scroll through the site. So it's kind of a fun, very interactive or presentational way to show off the site, where as they're scrolling and inviting more content to come into play, they're initiating that interaction and they're initiating those animations, and it's kind of a fun way to feel like the user is very in control of what's happening. And then another animated trend that's happening right now is this idea of micro interactions, where there's these very subtle moments happening that might have to do with hovering or scrolling, and probably something that's mostly happening on desktop, not so much on mobile, but I might be wrong. Maybe these are actually achievable on mobile as well. But a lot of really fun ways to show a trigger that's going to happen when you hover over, so that people know and are aware that that element is clickable and is basically saying, hey, click me, I'm going to do something. And so a lot of those micro interactions can be even with your mouse or cursor moving around the screen too, and can even be the way that you interact with the page and move your cursor around the page and it's flowing in a different way. So kind of ties to the scrolling effects that we were talking about, but seems to be a much more detailed approach to website design. And then last trend number 15, link in bio. So this is what felt like a monopoly with Linktree has now become this link in bio kind of boom or burst happening in the last year, where a lot of these other brands are coming up with ways to present link in bio in a different way. And so it's definitely this landing page trend where so many people have different sites and sources and other things that are happening throughout the interwebs, that bringing it all in one place makes a lot of sense for social media. And so this might be a trend that's not going to go anywhere anytime soon, or maybe it will. It's definitely this new idea of a landing page and a like everything in one place kind of a page. So those are the 15 design trends that I'm noticing lately. Feel free to comment below, let me know what you think, or if there's any other trends that I've missed. And please subscribe if you want to see more content like this. I would love to share even more trends and more design tips and tricks on here. So thank you for following along.